variables. So as I am looking at this one, it means that I'm going to work with two variables. When we did our height and we did our shoe size, we had two variables. A lot of times when you look at two variables, the thing that is nice about it is a way to organize it. Sometimes it would be in a graph like we did. Other times it's going to be in a table that we're going to look at today. Usually there might be some kind of a cause. Like we found that when you had a larger shoe size, you sometimes were taller, right? Not always. Or there is at least a relationship between the two variables. Okay? So there is a relationship, like they're related to each other somehow. Okay? One might not cause the other one, but they are related to each other. Okay? You are going to be looking today at some tables like this. And when we go to do this project for your two questions that I was talking about, you are going to have, making a two-way table, something like this. You will write in the frequencies. So if you did tallies on yours today, and you did those, like you were asking people and you were looking at, you might have had something like this. You want to write it as the number 2. That's our frequency. And in this case, the 10 on this survey means that 10 men that were surveyed chose that they liked sports out of these 3 activities. So this table shows us 50. So one of the first things is if they tell you a total, like that there was 50 people surveyed, you will also notice in your table that this will be 50. So as we are taking a look at those, please quit. Yeah. So in this one, it says how many people like sports. So we want to take a look at the women that like sports, and we should have the women that like sports. We should have 6 people. Hang on, I'll just have you write it down. Don't say anything. I'll take the protractors. Next one, please write that next one down. If we are looking at the number of people that like dance, which should be 18. And then it says as we look at the total activities, so our dance, sport, and TV, if we look at their totals, which one seems to be the most popular? Dance. Right? But it says, but are they really pretty equal? If we are looking at them, yeah, they really are pretty equal. And really, dance was more popular. And if we look at the number of people that were surveyed, as we are taking a look at that, we had more. Because I don't want somebody in this survey liked and women. And so in this case, if we were going to choose, if we are looking at men for their activity should have been, the most favored one was sports. But really sports and TV were very close in that we are looking at 10 out of 20 people surveyed. And this one being 8 out of 20. 10 out of 20 means that we had about 50%. I'll get your question in a minute. Whereas for the women, their overwhelmingly favorite activity, if we look at the 16, 6, and 8, should have been 16 out of 30. 16 out of 30 is what percentage of the women? And if you don't have a calculator, please grab one up in the about 53%. We knew 10 out of 20 was 50%. 8 out of 20 was what percent? 40%. Okay. So between the sports and TV, the men choosing 40 and 50% of them, whereas women were overall at the 53% chose dance. This next table, this is what a lot of your homework looks like. So as we read this, a survey is conducted to see if students get an allowance or if they do household chores. So please fill in your table and put chores and no chores and then total. Going down, put allowance, no allowance, and total. So when you think of your 2 questions that you're asking people, so like some of you, the question is, do you have your permit or not, right? This is how, when we set ours up after you've gathered your data, you're going to be making one of the questions on the project is to make this 2-way table, okay? So, as we fill this in, it says, of the 12 students that receive no allowance. So we want to go all the way across to no allowance, and we want to write in 12, because that's our total number of students that receive no allowance. Then it says 5 of them have no chores. So we also know this number. So please fill those to it. The next piece of information that they give us is that there are 17 students who do chores and receive an allowance. So that statement, allowance and chores, is telling us to fill in the 17 here. The last number that they tell us is that while 6 get an allowance without doing any chores. So we want to go allowance with no chores, which is 6. From this information, we now want to fill in the rest of ours. So 17 plus 6, we can easily find that total of 23. The 6 and 5, we can add and get 11. So what's going to happen is you'll always be given 4 pieces of information and you'll find the others. 23 plus 12 is going to give us 35. And once we know 35, we're going to take 35 minus 11 to give us
24.
So we now have 24. We could have taken 12 minus 5 to get this number, which would give us 7. Or we could take 24 minus 17. So all of your numbers have to add up. If when you fill yours in, like you would have put 17 back here, and then you put the 6, all of a sudden the numbers are not going to work out. They're not going to add up. So once you start filling in the ones that are given to you in the story, my hint is on your homework, you might want to check before you kind of do the whole thing. This main question is how many people were surveyed. So as we look at that next one down, the first piece of information they tell us is that 8 people have no dog. So under no dog at the bottom, we are going to put 8. It says of those 8, which means we're looking at the no dog people. 2 have no cat. So we want to go to the no cat people, right? It says there are 4 people with a cat and a dog. This is our 4 over here that we are given. And the last one says, well, 3 students have a dog and no cat. So we want to have dog and no cat is going to be our last number that we are going to fill in, which is 3. So from this information, we now want to fill in the rest. We can add 4 and 3 to get our total of 7. What's that? Just wait. We'll read the question. So here, 8 minus 2 is going to give us the 6. 7 plus 8, 15. 3 plus 2, 5. 10 plus 5 gives us 15. 7 plus 8 gives us 15. So you're always able to kind of do a check that way. And the question said, how many people were surveyed? 15. Oh! Right? Because we are looking at, that is our total as we look at that way. Okay? So anytime you get that total.
Right.
So as we are taking a look at the next one, again, as we read the question for what the information is. 25 students participated in this survey. 14 students do not participate in the sports. 7 do not take a foreign language. 6 students take a foreign language and play sports. So 25 surveyed, that's our total. We want to put in 25. After we have our 25, next piece of information, 14 students do not participate in sports. So we want to go to no sports, and we want to put in 14. That is our total that are not participating in sports. And it says, and 7 do not take a foreign language. So when we are looking at that, no foreign language, that's 7. Now, I have had some people think they thought that that was part of the 14, and they had to put it here. It just says in 17, do not take a foreign language. That means total. So sometimes interpreting what the problem is telling us, some students get confused where to put the numbers. This last one, 6 students take foreign language and play a sport. So the FL is our foreign language and a sport. is 6. As you look at this, it might be easiest to find our total up here first, right? 25 minus 14 is going to give us 11. Once we know that's 11, 25 minus 7 is going to give us 18, right? So we're just kind of subtracting as we are looking at those. Well, now I had 6, has to add to 11 and add to 18. If I want to go no foreign language should be 5. If I have our sports, if I'm looking under foreign language and I have 18, so please fill this in. You have something to write. So if we're having this one, we should have 12. And our last missing one was 2. And the question said, how many students take a foreign language, and play no sport? We should have had 12 students. Take a foreign language and do not have a sport. Okay? So when we look at our information, this is how we are going to be looking at it. This is where we need your calculator for this last part. And it's talking about what's the relative frequency. And relative frequency just means that you're going to take a subgroup count divided by our total. So sometimes you are going to be given a relative frequency when we look at these for the whole table. When you do the whole table, you're going to divide by 50. So right by the 50, put whole and put divide 50. If I am asking you to find the relative frequency for the whole table, that means you're going to divide each of these categories by 50. If it asks you to do it by the rows are what go across. So at the top, please put an arrow and put rows. Rows always go across. So if I said, oh, what % of men chose dance? You take 2 dividing it by 20. If I said, how many men chose dance out of the total? You take 2 and divide it by 50. So you got to watch the wording as we look at this. The other one is going down. That is our columns. So if you have in front of your house or in front of a building, those tall pillars are called columns sometimes that go down. So here's our first question. It says row relative frequency. What % of the men choose a sport for their favorite activity? So the first thing we want to do is behind the word men, we want to write down all of our category numbers, which was 2, 10, 8, and 20. The 20 was our total. So if we want to find the relative frequency of men whose favorite activity was sports, sports is 10 divided by 20. First, sometimes relative frequency, we write it as a decimal, 0.5. But in this case, they asked us for a %, so you move your decimal over 2 places, and we get 50%. The next one says column relative frequency. So this was our row going across. Now we're going to do column going down. If we are doing the column going down, it says what % of the people who like sports are women. So under sports. So we're going to write down sports. And our numbers going down in that sports column were 10, 6, and 16. So I'm going to put 10, 6, and 16. Which means if I am looking at people who like sports and are women, I am taking 6 on my calculator and dividing it by 16. So please write the fraction first and then put the decimal, which as a decimal comes out to be .375. Thank you. And now it said what %? So 37.5%. I had someone say, can I round it and put 38%? And you'll kind of see that sometimes we just need those percents to add to 100, so you just got to be careful how you're rounding. The last one is a table. So when it says table relative frequency, that means we are looking at dividing by 50. So it says what % of the people like dancing? So we're looking at our total dancing, which in this case is 18. So that was our total from dance. And we are dividing it by the total number of people that we surveyed. So 18 out of 50 should give us decimal of 0.36, which means What percent of people like dancing? 36%. So that's how we're going to be using our calculator as we look at these. That next table down, if we look at that situation, it says Mr. Gross wants to analyze his two-way table to examine if there is a relationship between doing homework and passing the last test in his class. So, missing 0 to 1 assignment. Total number of people, 0 to 1 assignment was 16. Missing 2 or more assignments was 14. He had a class size of 30. That's the number of people total in our class. If we are looking at this, we are looking at the number who passed the test. 18 out of the 30 passed the test. 12 out of the 30 failed the test. So it says what percent failed this class or failed the test. So if we are looking at that, you're going to put the percent in the box, but right behind that I want you to tell me the two numbers we're dividing by. We're looking for the whole class, so we're going to divide by 30. And if we are looking at the ones that failed, so our failed tests, 12 divided by 30, which gives us exactly 0.4, which means 40%. So this is a decimal, is 0.4. Remember, to change a decimal to a percent, you move it over 2 places, 40%. So the next one says, what percent of his class missed 2 or more assignments? Do we want to divide by 30, or do we want to divide by the 14? Are we talking about the... We want to divide by, careful, we want to take the 14 and divide it by 30. 30 is because it says what percent of the class, right? So if we're talking about his whole class, we need to divide by 30. And 14 divided by 30 gives us, so what did you get, Nikita? 0.46 repeating. So we are going to say about 47%. The next one says, of those who missed 2 or more homework assignments. That is our column, which means that's going down. Missed 2 or more homework assignments. We need to divide by, if we are looking at this. So wait, careful. Of those who missed 2 or more homework assignments, what percent passed the test? So if we are looking at this, we need to look out of our total that, in this case, passed the test, right? So if we are looking at what percent failed the test, I'm reading 2 different questions at the same time. So C, if we look at it, I was reading C and D. If we look at C, the ones that failed the test, that is going to be our row. Do you agree? Going across, we're looking at all those who failed, which we're going to divide by 12. What percent missed 2 or more assignments? So please, on your calculator, divide 11 by 12. And we're going to change it right away. Don't put that decimal. We're going to put the percentage, which would be about 92. So on this next one, it says, of those who missed 2 or more homework assignments, we are doing column here. Why is it a column? Because the 2 or more homework assignments is our 14. And then we are looking at that passed. So they missed 2 or more homework assignments, but they passed the test. 3 divided by 14. Please, everyone, do this on your calculator and write it down. Don't say it. Just write it down. The next one is asking us those that missed 0 to 1 assignment, which means we want to divide by the total that missed, which is 16. And it said what percent failed that test. So we're taking 1 and dividing it by 16. So do these last 2 on your calculator, and we're going to look at those 2. So we have 21% for 3 divided by 14. If we are looking, Kara, at the 1 divided by 16, what did you end up with? What did you say? 16 or 6? You take 1 and divide it by 16. 0.06, right? So we'd say about 6%. And here's this last part. You are going to be asked to write statements like this on your on the test for this unit. So we'll have a test on this unit. before we have our year-end tests. It says, write a statement that summarizes your analysis. Use relative frequencies, that means these percentages, right, to support your answer. So in this case, we found some different percentages. We didn't find all of them, so there could be other ones that you could find. And here's the key thing with this. As you look at this answer, so it says, when you are writing your answers for this, you want to be thinking of an introduction, you want to give me the reason and a conclusion, a sample answer. And so a lot of times in your homework, you might see something like this. Mr. Gross wanted to find out how many students failed his test. That was what we were initially trying to look. 40% of the students in Mr. Gross' class failed the test. However, of those kids who failed, 92% of them had missed 2 or more homework assignments. Of the students that did their homework, only missing 1 or not assignments, only 6% failed. That shows the students that are doing their homework passed the test, and those who didn't do their homework were possibly failing the test.